Let's talk with Christian in Wisconsin. Hello.
How is everyone there? Good to meet everybody.
Hello. Good to meet you. What can we help you with today?
Yeah, I was going to ask a relatively basic question, but after listening to the opening, it was pretty much already answered. So would you mind if I called a small audible?
Sure, go for it.
All right, so we were talking about helping amplify visibility, and I wanted to ask this question. I wrote it down so I didn't forget it because my first time calling into an ACA show, but how does someone who is a new content creator on media like YouTube, like myself, help amplify visibility while also not falling into the trap of tokenism and kind of cheapening the experience?
That is a good question. That is a very good question. I know I have my thoughts, but I do want to open it up to our guests and to our main host as well.
I mean, I think if you're like unsure about what kind of things to include, like the ACE community is really open to talking to people. So like getting input from other asexual people is always one way of doing it. And one thing I always really appreciate is people who do good research. Like around Pride Month, everyone magazines will start throwing out their like obligatory asexual like articles where it's kind of like they read like a website and then did a cliff notes, and some people don't notice, but I always kind of notice, and I'm like, well, thank you for reading the asexual dictionary. But like adding some kind of like human element to that, I always think is kind of important, and kind of like exploring how it actually might play out for asexual people rather than just breaking it down into does this, doesn't do that, does this. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest things that I appreciate when people do put the content out there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'd say in addition to that, I feel like tokenism very often centers around we need somebody to fill this role and then talk about what I want to talk about and share my viewpoint and, you know, back me up in my thought process. And you see this with all different groups of people. Oh, well, I cited this person and they agree with me. Well, yeah, the reason you cited somebody different than you is because it's the one person you could find who agreed with you. So tokenism a lot of the time is just having a slot to fill and then using them to back your own agenda, even if it, again, like Miss O was talking about, you haven't done the research to see what their perspective might bring to the table. If you want to talk about true representation and really like using your platform to raise awareness, having somebody on who is an expert in their own experience to talk about that experience and to maybe shift your position a little bit. Or talk about, if you want to talk about an issue that maybe you are interested in, but you are not of the community that you are talking about, having somebody from that community come on and talk about it with you in a way that challenges both you and the audience. So tokenism is more about putting up that facade of diversity while maintaining the message you are comfortable with, whereas diversity and inclusion a lot of the times will test you a little bit and will, you know, push your boundaries maybe a little bit, but it will be more honest and authentic because you're letting the other person speak from their own experience.
Okay, yeah. I know a couple of days ago, Vi had sent me some material on these issues, and I've been reading it pretty closely to try to get a better understanding. But I guess, do you think there's a danger as far as citing sources and finding good information? Is there, do you think, a bend to the information on sexuality based on the normative societal cultures that would make, you know, studies and information perhaps lean towards a bias towards fundamentalism or like the puritanic cultural roots that Vi talked about earlier?
Sometimes there is. There's actually a lot of research out there that's been put out on like the asexual community and asexuality in general. Like the last few years, there's a lot of studies going on and, you know, things like that. I tend to find like if you're reading like from, you know, other sources like articles or whatever, like if there's a person involved in it that you can see, like an interview, that's usually a better sign than if it's just facts. I know a lot of the time it's a bit like the drinking thing again. Like a lot of articles will like to really push the aspect that some asexual people will have sex for whatever reason. And they like to really focus on that because I think it makes people comfortable. They're like, oh, they're not that weird. They have sex too sometimes. Okay, we're okay. And that gets a lot of airtime right now. And I mean, it's important to be inclusive of all of the community, but I think it's really important to maybe amplify some of the voices that make people a little more uncomfortable, like the people who are like hardcore no on the sex, like I don't even want to talk about it or watch a movie with it. Like I think like trying to also include those voices is really important because those voices you would think are like a huge part of the community, and they are, but if you look at a lot of the representation, they're the more for some people ones, so they tend to get drowned out a bit, and I think that kind of hurts the community sometimes and kind of dilutes it because everyone's like, well, what's the big deal then? And I'm like, well, some people are happy over here, but some people are very much over here. And like I think, yeah, including those challenging voices is like hard for people to do, but because it doesn't always, shift magazines, but it's probably the most important thing to do.
Right. I think the best way to control for that concern about bias from another perspective slipping in is to go directly to the source. Like find interviews with individual people, watch channels where people talk about their experience as a particular type of person. Because if you're looking at it through that secondary lens of, well, I am not this person, I'm going to put on this lens and pretend I understand, or even, honestly try to understand. But there's still that middle lens that you just don't need if you go straight to the person who you're interested in or who has the experience that you're interested in talking about.
Well, and applying a variety of voices, right? Because there are some ace folks that are interested in sex. There are some that are not. There are some ace folks that have sexual trauma, but there is some of everybody that has sexual trauma. And so making sure to acknowledge that, yeah, that's part of the community because it's part of every community, but not putting that as like the focal point, as it so often is.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for taking my call. It's been a real pleasure, and I want to let other calls in, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Christian. Thanks for
Appreciate you
calling in.
Yeah, have a good one.
Bye. That's fun. I remember Christian.